Welcome back. Today you join me from the Great British Car Journey. I've visited here a few times in the past and had a look around the fantastic car museum here, as well as visiting Drive Dad's car, where you can come and actually take the vehicles for a drive around the site, which is great fun if you've never done it before. Today though I'm here for something a little bit different. Today is an event that suits me down to the ground because it's a French car event. Today we are here for Voitures Francaises and you are watching Mark on Motoring. Now when you say French cars you automatically think of Peugeot, Citroën, Renault perhaps, but there are actually some other French marques out there too. Take for example Matra, who was actually big in motor racing circles, who also built the first three generations of the Espace for Renault and the Aventime. But they also made some rather interesting sports cars for the road as well, like this one behind me, the Matra Marina. These replace the earlier Bagheera, but very similar mid-engine layout, 3 seats in the front with the driver sitting on the left-hand side. This particular one is a 2.2, but there was also a 1.6 litre version as well, which I believed shared its engine with one of the Talbot saloon cars of the era. Now the car that preceded this, the Bagheera, was actually manufactured in greater numbers than the Marina. The only thing is the rust proofing weren't so good. So the survival rate on the Marina is much greater, although as I say they did make far less of them. But if the Matra Marina wasn't rare enough, there's probably something here that is even lesser seen. Renault 17 over there. Now up until a few years ago I'd never actually seen a Renault 17 or indeed the Renault 15. Yeah, Renault's sort of coupe from the 1970s, pillarless coupe as well in terms of this 17 over here. I've probably seen 2 or 3 of these in existence in the last few years, that's it. Really rare car. I always felt they actually had a little hint of American styling about them as well, especially around the rear end and on the earlier cars with the chrome front bumpers as well. So it's not just older classics that are here today, there are some slightly more modern cars as well. And before you start shouting at me in the comments, I'm not only going to feature something modern but also electric. Peter, you happen to own this rather interesting little EV, yeah. Renault Twizy. So tell us, how did you come by this?
Well, I started looking at electric cars on Auto Trader 5 years ago. I just put them in price order just to see what was around, and these started to come up. And I've seen them when we've been abroad. I've never seen them in this country, and I didn't realise they were available here.
Right.
So as soon as I saw them, I was interested. So yeah, before I knew it, we were on our way down to Uxbridge to have a look at this. I bought it just for a bit of a laugh, really. You know, it's just something different. And I actually prefer to drive this than my ordinary car. You know, on a nice day I use this for going to work, nipping to the shops, you know, all sorts of things. It's great.
You could use it as an everyday car, but in reality there are probably a few issues, like the fact that it doesn't have windows and the doors were an optional extra.
Yeah, I mean, I have actually got windows for this, but to be perfectly honest, they're like a piece of Perspex. They don't look great. You have to Velcro them in at the top and they flap around in the wind, so I use this generally when the weather's nice. If it does rain whilst you're driving along, you don't get wet. It's only an issue really when you've left it parked and the rain comes in. It is waterproof, and I keep a towel in the glove box to dry the seat just in case, you know. But yeah, it's a nice weather car really.
Yeah, I suppose anyone that's used to riding a motorcycle, it'll probably feel like luxury by comparison.
Yeah, I guess it would do. Yeah.
So obviously, speed on these is it 50 miles per hour they're limited to?
Yeah, it was limited to 52 miles an hour. I bought a tuning box for this that plugs into the OBD port, and there's a phone app, so the power's been boosted. I've told my insurance company about this as well, they're happy with that.
Yeah.
And it's taken the speed restrictor off. I have actually had 70 miles an hour out of this on the motorway.
Right.
Which surprisingly you can actually take it on the motorway. It's a heavy quad, so you can do that. And the acceleration is much quicker now. I mean, I live in a hilly area, and it was sort of, you were holding traffic up, going up a hill slowly at 24 miles an hour. Now it'll do 30 plus, so you're not really in anybody's way.
Yeah. Whereas obviously there's cars like the Citroen Ami, isn't there? Is it 28 mile an hour? I think that's
so,
limited
yeah.
to.
I mean,
so
that'd be too slow for me to use.
yeah.
If you're in a city, great, but I'm sort of, out in the country, and you need a bit more. It's got power to overtake as well now, which is handy.
Well, I imagine even at 50 miles per hour, you must feel like you're really going some in one of these.
You do, yeah. Yeah, it's 70. I was surprised actually. I had it on the motorway. I got it up to 70 miles an hour. It was on a slightly downhill stretch, and it did take a while to get there, but it did it. And it was surprisingly stable actually.
Right.
I was quite happy with it. It didn't feel particularly scary. I mean, when you look at the thing from the outside, it looks really small, but when you're in it, you almost feel like you're in it. It's so car-like.
Yeah.
You don't feel small. It's strange.
Yeah. Obviously, you mentioned you've got that tuning box, so I mean, these didn't have the greatest of range to start with because there was always intended as a city runaround, really.
Yeah.
So what's the range sort of standard, and then with the extra performance?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of range, other Twizy owners go by they call it the 30-50 rule. So you'll get 50 miles at 30 miles an hour or 30 miles at 50 miles an hour.
Okay.
Even with the tuning box on this, generally I get 40 miles out of a charge.
Yeah, which for most people is enough for most journeys, I would imagine.
Yeah, I mean, my trip to work's only 4 miles each way. I park it under the bike shelter at work just in case it rains. So, yeah, it's absolutely fine. You can get 4 bags of shopping from the supermarket, 2 in the back, 1 down each side. So,
right.
It's more practical than you might imagine.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember when these were new. Were they about £6,000 or £7,000?
Yeah, I think that they were about £7,000, but you had to lease the battery.
Okay.
Now that was £45 a month, which is quite a lot of money, in terms of running costs. When I bought this second hand, I had to pay the battery lease, and after a while I thought I'm just going to buy the battery. I think it was, I can't remember whether it was £300 or £400 to buy the battery, so I have.
Right.
And I've had no issues with it at all.
Excellent, that's great. Right, well, thank you very much.
Yeah,
Thank you.
Nice to meet you.
So lots of fascinating cars, Renault Sport Clio 182, I do love those. Citroen GSA again, another fantastic car. Renault Twingo, I love these little cars and they're becoming so popular. They actually marked 30 years of the Twingo last year. This one's actually owned by a young lady who bought it quite recently. And she's even got the little electric toy Twingo as well, which I really, really like. But one car that really has caught my eye is the Citroen BX. Now, I've seen plenty of Citroen BXs before, but this particular version is a really, really early one. David, you're the proud owner of this car, and I believe it's just won
yes,
at the show today.
Just won. I think it's third place, but I'm very, very happy about that. It's a bit of a shock.
Yeah, excellent.
Only Citroen BX here. Yeah, it's I've owned it since November last year. Bought it off Up and Down Vids off YouTube. Richard Kitchen. Richard deserves a lot of the credit for restoring the car mechanically, and now I'm trying to sort out the cosmetics on it basically, which is why if you put your ear down to the bumper you'll actually be able to hear it oxidising. There's been about 40 hours gone into those bumpers to make them look even vaguely red, basically.
Yeah. Now most of the panels on these are plastic, aren't they?
It's actually a bit of a misconception. Most of it is metal,
Oh,
but
right.
there is more plastic in it than most of the cars of the time. So
Yeah.
bonnet is plastic, tailgate is plastic, and the rear quarters are plastic where those little quarter-like windows are.
Yeah.
But everything else is steel and does
Oh, right.
rust.
Yeah, yeah. Thing is, well, obviously, when you have got sort of composite body panels and things, sometimes it's what's hiding behind them, isn't it? Because usually there's a metal structure somewhere behind there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I've been quite lucky with this one because of the history of it, because it never ran right from new. I think the original owner that bought it had a faulty carburettor.
Okay.
And as a result, I think they gave up on it. So it got parked on various driveways in Swansea over various years with people trying to get it to work. Unfortunately, that meant it was parked by the sea.
Right.
So lots of salt water sitting in the bottom of the doors, which is why this is rusty in a few places that it shouldn't be. But because it's only done 25,000 miles and it was barely driven, it's not rotten in the usual places, which is why I'm quite lucky with it. So underneath sort of on the floor pan where the rear suspension's mounted and everything is absolutely as solid as a rock. So it is a good basis to work off.
Yeah.
But yeah, it had a faulty carburettor from brand new, which is why the mileage is so low, because people just, I think they gave up. And like I say, it's Richard Kitchen, Up and Down Vids, who sussed it out basically. I think he tried rebuilding the carb first, couldn't get it to work, threw a brand new one on and fired up straight away.
Yeah.
He did the mechanical recommissioning, so subframe got sorted out, new bearings, all those bits and pieces, suspension repiping, big mechanical recommission, so it does drive absolutely spot on.
Yeah.
And then, like I say, I've been working on the cosmetics, which is trying to tidy it up a bit. I fitted a new interior because the original one was, he said, painfully original. I said excruciatingly original. It was just the original jersey cloth fabric that was in these.
Yeah.
The moment the sun saw it, basically it just dissolved. So
Oh,
the
right.
seats in this car were like tissue paper. You put your sort of hands on them and you could hear them crinkling.
Oh dear.
So yeah, it's not strictly period correct. The interior that's in there, I think it's out of a Leader. This is a 16 TRS, so
Yeah.
extreme Citroen nerds will look at it and go, that's the wrong one, but it looks 1000% better than it did.
Yeah, but definitely worth the effort to save. I mean, it's hard to believe. You look at these now, these Bertone styling, and you can't believe they're 40 years old. They still look like something from the future, don't they?
And the thing I loved about this, because my dad had a 16 TRS when I was growing up, an A-Reg one, and it's what got me interested in cars in the first place, basically. And ours was like a spaceship compared to everything else that was on the road.
Yeah.
I remember being super proud of it. You know, I got electric windows in the back and an armrest. Nobody else had those sorts of things.
No.
You know, and the car, rised when it started up, and it really, really captured my imagination.
Yeah.
He loved his BX so much that he wound up working for Bristol Street Citroen in Nottingham, selling
Okay.
them. So as a result, he was coming home with new ones every 5 minutes. And if you're watching this, Dad, it's your fault that I buy so many cars now, because you kept bringing new cars home every 5 minutes.
Yeah.
But he loved it, and it really ignited my imagination. Without this, I wouldn't be interested in cars. This is what got me going in the first place.
Yeah.
So I never thought I'd have a BX, let alone a Mark 1 BX.
No.
So to be able to have one and drive it, some aspects of it are great, some aspects of it aren't quite what I thought they would be, but it's very charismatic.
Yeah.
And apart from trying to wrap my head around, it's the first car I've had since 2001 without power steering.
Oh, wow.
And
So everything else is power, the suspension and everything,
suspension,
but
brakes, I mean, the brakes are ferocious.
Yeah.
The brakes are unreal. But yeah, no power steering, so you do have to think a little bit when parking it and stuff, but it just drives sublime.
well, that's fantastic. Thank you very much. And obviously, you mentioned you've got a channel yourself. If people want to see a bit more of this,
Yeah, you can follow me at Indecisive Auto on YouTube.
Excellent.
And I'm also that ID on Twitter as well.
that's great. Right. Well, thank you very much. And there's plenty more for us to look at, so we'll move on. Because it wouldn't be a French car event without some form of Citroen 2CV here, and there are plenty of those cars. But the 2CV does lend its chassis to a lot of very interesting kit cars. Pete, tell us a little bit about this tricycle that we've got here.
This is one-off. It was originally a 1979 Citroen Diane 602cc, and it was built specifically for long-distance trials organised by the Motorcycling Club.
Oh, wow.
So it has to meet all their rules of compliance with a tow bar, a tow rope on the front,
Okay.
a huge fire extinguisher,
Yeah.
an ignition cut-off on the outside in case of any problem on the hills.
Yeah.
And it did some competition. There's a YouTube where it's titled "The Fastest Mole on the Hill,"
Oh, blimey.
and that shows the previous owners thrashing it up a very loose, rocky hill.
Yeah.
For the Land's End trial.
Yes, no. No, yes, he's off, he's going, he's Omega. Go on. Whoa, hey! My God. He's going to overtake him.
Wow, blimey.
I bought it in 2016, totally by accident. I saw an advert on a commercial page and it said tricycles brackets 3. So I clicked on the link and contacted the guy thinking it would be sold. And he said, I've not had one inquiry.
All right.
So he had an inquiry. I had a long chat with him. We trolled off to Devon to collect it. I also got a van load of spares, spare engine, you name it, and drove it back up the M5 and then the M42 and the M1 home at 70 mile an hour.
Yeah.
And people were passing us and then slowing down and taking pictures. Yeah, it's just a total fun car.
Well, earlier this year I actually had my first ever drive of a 2CV, which was over the Buttertubs Pass of all places, so probably not the easiest place for your first time in one of these cars. And even that was great fun once you get to grips with it. Obviously this has a wheel less for a start, and it's probably even lighter than a 2CV, I imagine, so probably great fun.
It is, but like everything else, it has its drawbacks because it's front-wheel drive.
Yeah.
Yes, the engine's over the front wheels, but of course, if you're going uphill, you really need the weight at back.
Right.
And secondly, being front-wheel drive, the steering lock's restricted. You really need a rear-engine car with a really tight.
Yeah, and on those trials there will be a lot of tight turns.
Things like Hillman Himps and
yeah.
But yeah, it's just a totally fun car. I mean, you know, the rules, the fire extinguisher's nearly as big as the fuel tank on it. And being home built and a Bitzer, there's no fuel gauge. I have a piece of stick with markings on it, and I dip it
the tank
in the tank to see how much petrol I've got.
Yeah.
But it's, just absolutely fabulous.
Well, that's fantastic. Well, thanks very much, Pete.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, yeah, plenty of 2CVs, Citroën AK van over there. Renault 9, this one actually belongs to Darrell. I've featured this car previously at French Car Show at Chesterfield a couple of years ago. It's a really nice example, actually, that one, and a special edition as well. Yep, another 2CV actually. Yep, looks like an early Ripple bonnet car. Simca, again, you just don't see Simcas at very many of these shows. This blue one here, again, I actually interviewed Stephen, who owns this car, at Chesterfield a few years ago as well. This car actually owned by Mick, who I've spoke to previously from the Simca Club. I'm actually hoping to maybe film one of Mick's other cars at some point in the future as well. Alpine A110 here, there was actually another one here earlier on. Club UK Peugeot Sporter here as well, with some really nice examples of some 205s. But there is another 205 here that is a really immaculate example. 205 XR. These were actually quite a nice spec model, so you got things like tinted windows and a few other niceties that just weren't standard on cars back in the 1980s. We've also got that 1.4 litre TU series engine, similar to that you would have seen in models like the XSI. But yeah, this one looks really fantastic. We've also got some nice alloy wheels, as seen on the 1.9 litre versions of the GTI as well. But this white GTI, that's the 1.6 version of the car. That one's actually got the little Peugeot Sport graphic on the front as well there on the grille and the yellow fog lamps. That looks really, really nice. We've actually got two convertible versions. We've got a CTI in front of me there, and then next to me here we've actually got a Gutmann version as well, so really, really nice to see that one out today. 205 dimmer, I'm actually not sure if this could be the one I saw down at Simply French at Brooklands last year, which is quite away from here, but it could be. Dimmer, exceptionally rare car, obviously quite expensive back in the day, but they do look a lot like the T16 with those wide wheel arches and those sort of faux vents at the back. It's still a front mounted engine, but one thing with these dimmers is they are a lot more than just a body kit. There is a lot of other modification that went on with these cars as well. Now, I do love a Mark 1 Renault Clio, when interestingly enough, not all of them were Williamses and 16 valves. No, most of us actually drove something a little bit more modest. That said, though, this particular one here is quite a nice specification car. So what we've got is a Mark 1 Phase 2 model, so it had the slightly revised trim on the boot lid, this little piece added into the grille here, a few other little subtle differences. This one's actually got the extended dash top on as well, which again, initially not all cars had that. It's an RT specification. Now the RT got you a lot more equipment inside, things like a rev counter, electric windows, sunroof. None of these things were standard on your more basic Clios. You also got colour-coded bumpers and front integrated fog lamps, which again you wouldn't have got on the lesser models of this car. This one has got the 1390cc fuel-injected energy engine, which would have produced around 80 horsepower, and this one is actually mated to the automatic gearbox. As with many Mark 1 Clios that are not the hot ones these days, a lot of the ones that survive do seem to be automatics. I have actually been told this particular one was a Motability car back in the day, and I think many of these probably were bought by elderly drivers who just hung on to them and cherished them. It's really nice to see this one out. I'm not 100% on this colour, but I believe it could be lavender. I know lavender certainly was on some other Renaults in the later 1990s. This looks very similar. It's sort of a lilac-y purple colour, but yeah, it looks really, really nice on this car. So here's one of the cars I actually thought I'd left, but thankfully not. So we've got this Alpine. This particular model is a GTA Turbo. So we've got that PRV, Peugeot Renault Volvo V6 engine with a turbocharger. The PRV also incidentally is the same engine that powered the DeLorean back in the early 1980s. These are actually really, really interesting cars. They're completely unique, often referred to as the French 911, but to be honest, even in France, they bought more 911s than they did the homegrown Alpine model, unfortunately. But there's certainly nothing else out there that looks like these. Well, nothing except another Alpine. Obviously the 310 that preceded this car has got some very similar styling cues, and then the A610 that followed on from this car, again very similar looking, just with pop-up headlights and a few other minor differences. But where the 310 seemed to hold a lot more of its heritage to the earlier A110 rally car, certainly the GTAs were much more of a GT car. In fact, in turbo form, these cars could probably easily crack 150 miles per hour. Again, the cabin was a big step up from the 310 that came before. They're certainly far more spacious. This particular one seems to have everything in as well, so we've got a lovely beige colour leather interior in here. We've got the double stack hi-fi as well, which is very 80s with all those sliders and things in there. A few very interesting quirks, things like these windscreen wipers, which for some reason we've got two wipers both mounted near the centre of the windscreen. Never fully understood why that is, but that is one very interesting and unique quirk of the Alpine. Back in 2013, I took the plunge and placed an order for a brand new Citroën DS3. Now the car that I had was the 1.6 THP, so that was the Prince engine, petrol engine with a turbocharger, and in that particular form of that time, because it was an early facelift, was 155 horsepower. It was a really, really quick car, although I did have my reservations about its handling on poor road surfaces. I did find the car used to tramline a lot. I am convinced to this day that the problem was not so much in the suspension but in the wheels and tyres. It sat on 17-inch wheels with a really low profile and quite a wide section tyre. But the car did have a lot going for it. It certainly felt a lot classier than say a Ford Fiesta, which were just as well because obviously the Fiesta would have probably run rings around it on the handling. The Prince engine itself, well again, that's something again that is often berated. They had a very skinny timing chain, almost like a bicycle chain. Obviously, when the cars got a bit older, especially if they hadn't had those regular oil changes, yep, you could have some really serious problems. But the engines pulled really strong. The rev round to 7,000 RPM, pulled cleanly from 1,500 RPM, and certainly when there was in working order, it was one of the best things about the car. Now the model behind me actually predates the one I had very slightly, but this isn't the standard THP engine because this is the racing. These actually produced over 200 horsepower. I think they had a few subtle adjustments to the suspension as well. So the interior of this car got some niceties like some racing bucket seats with Alcantara and leather. We also got this orange fascia panel as opposed to the carbon fibre that my car had, or the piano black that featured in some others. The orange was also replicated on the roof, the mirror backs, and on these 18-inch alloy wheels. A few other differences on the outside of the car. This trim piece here, instead of being chrome, carbon fibre, same with the skirts at the bottom, and we got the wheel arch spats which only came on the racing. Again, when you see close up, carbon fibre. Around this grille piece again, everything all painted in this orange to match the other trim pieces on the car. These were only actually made in small numbers, so you very rarely see the racings these days, but definitely an interesting car. Yes, the DS3 was a little bit flawed, I think, in the drive, or I certainly found that to be the case, but the cars did definitely have a lot going for it. As I say, they do really feel a class act, these cars, and I think that one day, yeah, certainly these racing models, I'm convinced they will become quite collectible. Admittedly, I'll seldom walk past a V6 Clio at any of these events, so this particular model here is a facelifted car, so we're up to about 255 horsepower. Still quite a wild beast, but supposedly a little tamer than the earlier cars. The phase ones were less powerful at around 230 horsepower from that 3 litre V6 24 valve engine. But supposedly the wheelbase was ever so slightly longer on the Phase 2 cars. First ones were developed in conjunction with TWR, and those cars really were quite a handful, even for professional racing drivers. But with so many fantastic cars attending here today, and the weather being so hot, I'm certainly glad that I brought my hat along today. Things are slowly starting to wind down, so I'm going to go have a chat with a few people, and I'm going to have another look in the museum as well, because even though I've been before, well, why not have a look again? I'll drop in a little bit of footage, but I do highly recommend the museum if you've never been before, as I do with Drive Dad's car. Again, it's a great opportunity to maybe have a go in something that you've always wanted to try, or maybe something that you remember a relative having in the past, or simply maybe you're interested in possibly buying a classic car yourself, and you'd like a quick go to see what they're like before you make that investment. As always, thank you very much for watching. There will of course be more videos to come in the very near future, so make sure you do hit that subscribe button, and again, if you've enjoyed this video, please do give it a thumbs up, just to let YouTube know that you're enjoying what they're showing you. That is all from me today. Thank you very much again for watching, and I will catch you on the next video soon. Thank you.